This Late Night Linux family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 100 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all for the 103rd time, even though this is episode 100, but let's not get bogged down in those details. For our 100th episode spectacular, we're going to look back at some of the themes and memes of the last 100 episodes or so. So what I did was look back through all the show notes of all the episodes we've done and kind of made some notes about what we've covered. And by far, the biggest thing we've covered is hardware. We seem to be just obsessed with really shit, really old hardware.
We have got to the point, Joe, where I'm about to have an embargo placed on incoming hardware in the house by my wife because there are too many computers in our bedroom.
In your bedroom?
They line the walls. I'm looking here. There's 2 laptops laying against the wall. There's a cardboard box with another one. There's one without a screen. Like, it's a menagerie of laptops. It's gone beyond a stack.
I guess we can't get through this without mentioning the stack of laptops, can we?
Well, no, that is a meme for a reason, because we all do have far too many computers.
This is true. It is becoming a bit of a problem.
And Gary, you've even had several clear-outs over the last couple of years, and yet you still end up with too many computers.
Yeah, that's because you keep challenging us to buy them.
Do not pretend that you need a challenge to buy shit old computers.
I think that Gary has the oldest stack as well, so that's why he's being so defensive. I'm pretty sure most of us don't have Pentium-era machines. Gary, do you?
There's not a Pentium. Actually, no, that's a lie. There is a Pentium. There's 286, a Pentium 2, a Pentium 3, and then it skips to much newer machines.
By far, my oldest machine is like a Core 2 Duo.
I've cleared all of those out even. Actually, my oldest laptop now is bought for a upcoming challenge.
Well, that's another thing. We've done a lot of challenges. I think, May, you worked out like 10% of the episodes or something have been challenges.
It is not hard to work out 10% when it's 10 of 100.
No, that's extreme complicated maths.
This is why the metric system didn't take off in the US.
Yeah.
I, to this day, return to the fact that my wife found it utterly bizarre when I literally celebrated like scoring a goal in a football match when I managed to get MorphOS to load the Late Night Linux website in a browser in the 4th layer of nested virtualization. She's like, what are you doing? And I tried to show her and just couldn't foster an excitement anywhere near mine. But there was a countdown and everything because it slows down to like unusably slow after a certain amount of time. So I was trying to get it running and everything. Those ones are really fun when you get a sense of satisfaction, but some of them have genuinely been useful in terms of realizing where I am at work, for example, of course, I'm actually in a VM. Where am I? There's going to be a performance hit. There's not going to be a performance hit. Actually, this is going to be okay. So they're always a mix of fun and educational.
The ridiculous thing is, by doing these silly challenges, I think we've all learned more about computers and have experienced more of computing than we did before, which is a weird thing to say, but is for people who all work in technology, as it were. That's kind of important.
I think it's because we want to know the why. You start looking into why. Why does it slow down at that threshold? Well, it can't handle manipulating how everything is being processed in the CPU. As I progressed in my job, that's become more important as people share CPUs and processors get spread. So it's all an organic beast, isn't it?
Looking down at that list of challenges, though, it's weird how I kind of won most of them. What are the odds
Isn't
on
it
that?
just the person with all the ideas for the challenges? It's almost like you're stacking the rules in your favor.
Well, you didn't win the oldest hardware challenges, so there is that.
Didn't win the nested virtualization. I think there's a bit of propaganda going on here. Most of them is over-generous.
Well, I did win most janky RAID/NAS setup.
Yes, that's true.
That's not most of the challenges, that's just the most janky. This is why Joe could be a statistician, you see.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely won the 50 quid challenge, though, with my cool iMac, which is now sitting on a shelf.
I won because I got the most useful machine that you wanted.
That's true. That's true.
I do think we're gravitating towards challenges with old things because new things are becoming harder to do that with. One of the things you've put is we just gave up on custom phone operating systems. And certainly for me, that was something I used to do a lot. And I'm pretty sure another member of the presenting team used to be part of a project to do with something along those lines.
I'm being called out here.
But that's just faded off into the background. And the tinkering that I used to do there is much easier when you go back to older laptops, and you can still do it with desktop Linux and server-based Linux in ways that I feel are being taken away from us in other areas.
I mean, I went and bought an iPhone, so I don't think I can really have any skin in this game anymore.
Well, I've summarized the 3 ARM topics as the Pi is dead to us, ARM Linux ain't it, and custom Android ROMs aren't really usable now. And I don't think that was necessarily the case when we started, was it?
No, I don't think it was. I mean, it was only 2021. It wasn't that long ago. So these factors were happening, and certainly, like, Android ARM devices in general were designed to be vertically integrated. You handle everything from the hardware that you want, the IP that you want in your processor, to the IP that you want in client hands or whatever. We're just seeing more of that dream being realized, I think, and it's really disappointing. The future kind of sucks.
Well, just look at Pixel phones. You used to be able to run custom ROMs on those really, really easily. And now with the latest version of Android that's just come out, they've not even released a device tree for them. So I'm sure it will still be possible, but there's just this gradual move to make more and more of Android proprietary and lock the phones down more and more, to the point where it's not really practical for most people to run a custom ROM anymore.
And where Google can just decide to brick them after 2 years.
Well,
Maybe I'm salty about that.
You're still upset about that?
I had to go and spend £300 on a new phone.
Well, I am worried about that because the Pixel 7a is what my wife has got, and we got one for our niece as well. And they've bricked the 4A and the 6A. I mean, maybe they're going to skip the 7A and go to the 8A next. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll be fine. And then I've got the 9A now, so I'll be fine. And I just won't buy a 10A. That's clearly what they're doing, right?
It's going to be like Windows versions, except not. I know that's a myth.
Well, the ARM landscape is strange. I feel split in two when I think about it, and that's in a professional context and in a client devices context. And custom ROMs have always been a bit of a shim in, especially lineage and stuff. You still have to have blobs, depending on how far you want to get with things. We've had the Pine phone and we've covered post-market OS, and there's admirable things about all of that, but it's not quite taken off. We spoke to Mark about the Lenovo Snapdragon laptop that just isn't quite there. The client devices things seems to be tapering off. In the professional sphere, I can't really speak to Ampere stuff. Maybe Gary could, but supposedly in the HPC world, there is this Isambard cluster of Grace Hopper machines that have Hopper architecture GPUs in and these Grace ARM core CPUs, but it's supposed to be taking off this summer. And I feel like that's always been the case. We're on the cusp of it. We're on the cusp of it. We're on the cusp of it, but it's never launched. So maybe that will take us in an interesting direction. But certainly on the client side, the dream of seeing the M1 Max come out and thinking, I want this, I want 20 hours battery life, passively cooled, that's gone. My tinkering phones has gone. That just does feel like it's withering on the vine.
Well, you mentioned the Max. Look what's happened with Asahi. I mean, yeah, the project is still going just about, but Hector's left. We've not seen any new machines get enabled. Are we ever going to see any more? I mean, maybe. But it feels like that project is, I don't know, on ice maybe, in maintenance mode.
Well, I remember being really excited about it at the time. What was it, 4 years or so ago, when I bought an M1 Mac Mini, and I did have these dreams of running it for a few years as my desktop and then retiring it to server use with Asahi. I ran it for that time as my desktop, and then I bought an M4 Mac Mini, and I'm still not confident to run Asahi on it as a server. So it's in the garage running macOS, doing server stuff. It's arguably not ideal, but you're right, it's still not there. And the machines that I bought in the interim are still not supported, which is really disappointing. And Chris, you mentioned the Snapdragon ThinkPad. Again, we never really got there, did we? Which is really sad to see, because on the server side, in the HPC world, Chris, you said it seems to always be around the corner, but in the cloud world, the ARM stuff has taken off massively. If you're running a managed database on a cloud provider or something, why wouldn't you put it on ARM at this point? It's better power to performance, it's cheaper to rent per hour. It just kind of makes sense.
But on the x86 side, and I don't know if we really predicted this, AMD kind of came in clutch.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of. At least if you're running Windows. The Linux support still seems to be kind of rocky at best. Hey, Joe?
I don't know about that. I think that it's the classic thing of like leave it a year or two and it's generally fine in my experience.
Okay.
Gary had some wobbles with an AMD ThinkPad X13, right?
Yeah, the Z13,
Z13, that's it.
Never stable under any Linux distro. And again, I don't know if that was just my particular one, but it did have multiple replacement motherboards, replacement drives, replacement memory. So I struggled to think that it was just a cursed Z13, but it just never felt particularly stable. And I've now switched back to an Intel laptop that, again, is a CPU from a previous generation and is absolutely fine.
It feels like a seesaw of wins and losses, though, right? Because we've discussed that AMD sticks with a socket on the desktop side, for example, for much longer than Intel. And you can still pick up cheap motherboards and upgrade the BIOS and upgrade the CPU on those. Intel have had all sorts of issues with quality control since 12th gen, and including in data center CPUs. And yeah, we found evidence, Gary, of AMD GPU bugs that were patched and graphical corruption that wasn't hardware-based, that you switched to Fedora to resolve one of those issues. But that was definitely kind of the fact that the stack for supported AMD GPU chipsets was so large that bugs do creep in. It's a big target to support in Mesa. So I broadly agree with May. At work, we're ordering AMD CPUs ahead of Intel, for example. When we're buying new boxes, we're going for high core count epics, where we can run highly parallelized workloads up to 384 cores a box. That's the direction that we've gone in there.
One thing that I think we were ahead of the curve on is composable / immutable distros. Basically what George Castro is doing. I think we recognized that that was the future pretty early on. And May, you're running that right now, aren't you?
I mean, yeah, everything, even the challenge machines we've been using most recently, I've been using Bluefin on them. It's really good, actually.
It's kind of your default now, isn't it, for Linux?
It's just what I have on the installer USB, and I always just slap it on whatever. Because even if the installer USB is a Fedora version or two old, it'll be able to upgrade. And that's magic.
I think it's definitely where I might go. We all know what operating system I run, so I'm not going to say it again.
Arch?
No, Nix.
Certainly, the Steam Deck has been discussed on things like Late Night Linux. The gains there as handhelds come out with a pre-install of Linux, gamers really like Bazzite. Like, that whole world is definitely gathering momentum, and there's an increase in interest, especially once large publications start publishing the performance gains that you get from running something like that. So I think it's gathering momentum, whether Phelim likes it or not.
Importantly, it makes it possible for distribution developers who aren't the traditional distribution developers you think of to ship things like improved performance for games in ways that you just aren't able to in like the Debian ecosystem, because you need to account for so many things and so many personalities at that.
Well, something that came up quite early on was questions about what is Linux, what is a Linux user, what is a boutique distro, that sort of thing. And I can't help but feel like the kind of person who cares about those kind of questions is not the target market for things like Bazzite and Bluefin.
You're probably right. One of the ways that George likes to describe Bluefin and Bazzite is batteries included. And I do think that's what most people are looking for. They want something that they turn on and everything is there. There's an onboarding experience saying, what do you want? Do you want this? You can have this. You check some boxes. You know, when you turn on a smartphone, that's what people are used to. There is a setup wizard on iOS and Android, and people get used to it. And yes, I know that distributions do that as well.
Yeah, the thing that you close immediately.
But, you know, people want to get to that straight away. These are the things I want to use. Get me there. The surrounding debate on whether this is or isn't true Linux, the Linux I want, the rest of those things, they're not concerned. What's the FPS in the games? How do I load Steam? How do I load the Epic Heroic Launcher, RetroArch, that kind of thing? Or on the developer side, do I have a development environment? I just need to be able to start developing.
It's people who want to use a computer to get something done, whether that is development or playing games, not someone who wants to use a computer to use the computer like the four of us do quite a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah, it's an appliance, right? And that's exactly the reason that it's perfect for the machines that I don't use as much, where the machine that's in my garage, for example, I think I mentioned when we were recording with George all that time ago, that is still running Bluefin because I can turn it on. I know that it will boot every single time. It gets the updates in the way that it gets the updates. And that's a machine where I'm watching a YouTube tutorial on changing a wheel bearing or looking up instructions on something, right? It's not something that I'm ever going to tinker with. It needs to play music and be a machine that I look up reference material on. I don't know if I could get to the point where I'm running it on a machine that I actually want to mess with and tinker with.
Right, but that aspect of you is not the target audience for that. And most people don't mess with their computers. Most people, the idea of this, you know, end of 10 campaign and, you know, switch to Linux instead of junking your old hardware and buying something that's capable of Windows 11. I mean, that's just dreaming. People buy a computer, turn it on and use it. You know, even when someone gets a hand-me-down laptop, they don't reinstall Windows on it.
Mm.
They just get the password of the person whose computer it was.
And as we've said multiple times here, most people are using their phone.
Yeah.
Or an iPad.
Yeah.
I think each of us has changed too, and I think it's important to recognize that over 100 episodes, other than the obvious.
Yeah, the obvious that Chris has gone from an enthusiastic amateur to a professional sysadmin.
Right.
He's gone from really loving helping consumers to just being a grumpy sysadmin. You're right.
Yeah, that's true, actually. You used to be like really active in Telegram groups and stuff, helping everyone, whereas now that's literally all you do all day, fixing problems. And now you get to the end of the day and you're just like, fuck this shit, I'm done with it.
I don't know. I mean, you say that, but look, you're talking to someone. Last night, I installed PyMega on one of the stack of laptops, and it was glorious. And I enjoyed it so much that I've ordered spare parts for the laptop because one of the speakers is blown. So, and that's a full disassembly of that laptop, which has no value for anything else. But I still do enjoy it. But going down a more professional route does take the edge. I have had 2 small kids as well, which does do that. But it takes the edge off the late night aspect of things, or the after dark, I should say more appropriately. But all of this has been a foundation for that. And ultimately, what I do in my job is what I used to do before I did my job. I'm lucky enough to get paid for it. And ultimately, you know, sometimes you might question things and think, oh, maybe I should think about moving on. But the worry I would have is, like, my job is to log into 350 computers all running Linux and fix people's problems on them and see what cool shit they can do. That's great. You know, I was doing that anyway on what I could get my hands on. And now I have a much more formal structure to that. I'd never been near a 384 core machine before I took this job, but I wouldn't have got there without gaining the confidence through doing something like this. So it's very important. And it's kind of given me the formal skills, I think. And as we said earlier on about the virtualization challenge, even if you think you're pissing about, I promise you, like 6 months later, you'll go, oh, this is incredibly relevant all of a sudden.
Actually useful.
A lot of things we have talked about have just turned out to be useful, yes.
Mm.
professionally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I mean, I've gone from being burnt out coming off of the Ubuntu Touch project to building more Linux systems, distributions, kind of like it for internal projects. And being able to apply all the things from this show, talking about things like development ability, as it were, or openness to change on things. It's not just useful for the end users of a product, it's also useful for the people doing development on the product.
Mm.
And I've kept things like that in mind because of what we do here.
And it's 100 episodes of background conversation as well. You know, we put 20, 25 minutes out there as the end product, but there's a whole conversation going on in the background around the recording, and it's all feeding the beast, as one of my friends would say. You know, it all feeds into knowledge, experience, and ideas, ultimately, I think.
We are who we are because of everything we've accomplished, experienced, and here we are with 4-ish more years of experience.
So what does the future hold then? Well, I'll tell you, the immediate future is we definitely need to talk about Ubuntu again. Gary needs to tell us about his Framework 12, and we've alluded to it, but there is another challenge coming. So that's the immediate future. But what's the long-term future? I think we're going to keep talking about shit old hardware because that's kind of what we care about. But it will be very interesting to see when we get to 200 episodes, if we get to 200 episodes, what we'll talk about.
And how the world has changed.
And if I've gone through a cycle of switching from Linux to Mac back to Linux again. Who knows?
It is interesting to think about how the landscape is going to break down, the promise of ARM, the promise of RISC-V, which we haven't even mentioned, but things will change. They always do. And we won't notice as they do as much as when we look back and suddenly think, oh yeah, that, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, I was fastidious in the idea that I would run only something like Lineage. I'd always buy a phone, unlock the bootloader. You know, this is the best way to do it. And now it's just completely taken out of my hands. I know you can still do all of that, but loads of applications don't work and the control is being taken from it. So these things are just going to change.
Yeah, and I've gone from exactly that same thing of like, it has to run Lineage officially to, fuck it, it folds.
Day by day, nothing changes, but when you look back, everything is different.
Indeed. Right, well, we better get out of here then. Thank you everyone for listening for the last 100 episodes and beyond. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I'm still May.
See you later.